I want to begin today's class with a few questions, a few discussion points. And the point of these discussions is, I want to start working through some issues with you and building a consensus, or I want us to start thinking about it before we get into reading in today's Tanya. The topic of today's class is Judaism. That sounds like a funny thing to say, no? Judaism. Like they say the joke that there's once a rabbi who came to a newly hired rabbi, comes to some town and down south, a Jewish city, they have a little Jewish synagogue. And the synagogue hires this new rabbi, new young ambitious rabbi. He's excited, he's gonna go to a city, he's gonna make his mark. And he has a meeting with the president of the synagogue. And the president says, this Shabbos is gonna be your first Shabbos as our rabbi. What do you plan on speaking about in your sermons? He says, I want to have my first sermon. I want to speak about Shabbos, the beauty of Shabbos, the importance of keeping Shabbos. And the president right away says, Rabbi, here in this town, nobody keeps Shabbos. It's very difficult. Nobody lives walking distance to the synagogue. People, you don't talk about Shabbos. This is not a good topic. It's a sore topic. So the rabbi says, you know what then? I want to talk about the necessity of Jewish education. Jewish education. The president says, Rabbi, Jewish education, it's not going to fly here. Rabbi says, I want to talk about kosher. Let's talk about the beauty of kosher, the importance of kosher. The president says, kosher, it's not, we don't really keep kosher here. It's just not what's popular in this town. You got to talk about something else. The rabbi says, I don't know. Anything I want to talk about. You say it doesn't. I don't know what I'm doing wrong over here. I would just want to give. So the president says, Rabbi, why can't you just talk about Judaism? Why can't you just talk? You see, there's. It's a little bit of a cynical joke. It's a little bit of a cynical joke because that's kind of. To a certain degree, that's a little bit of the state of affairs today, right? Judaism, but but not anything too practical. So you see, there really are two sides of the coin of Judaism. And let's coin it in this way. There's Jew in the heart, and there's Jew in action. There's Judaism in the heart, there's Judaism in activities. They're both important, right? They're both important. It's important that you have a Jewish heart and that you feel it and that you're connected intellectually, emotionally. And then there's also the action part of Judaism, doing, putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbos candles, putting a mezuzah up in your home, having a Shabbos dinner. So they're both important. My question to you is, which one is more important? Which one is primary? Which one is secondary? And why? Jew in the heart or Jew in action?
All right, I would say a Jew in the heart.
You'll take the bait, Jew in the heart.
Yeah, because you can follow all the rituals and all the mitzvahs. Externally, like Shabbos and lighting candles and that type of thing, but be a not so nice person.
Well, being a nice person is one of the mitzvahs also.
That's right. So that's a mitzvah also. So
that's still being a Jew in action, no?
I guess you could make the argument on both sides, really. But I just took that side.
So you say Jew in action is primary. And the activities is secondary. Is that going to be your vote?
Say that again.
That the Judaism in the heart is primary, and the action part of Judaism is secondary.
I'll say I'll go in between.
No. That's a cop-out. You got to choose.
I'll take a heart. I'll take the heart.
We'll take the heart as first. Okay. What else do you say? It's not an easy question to answer. What else do you say? What else? Anyone else got a thought? Elkie, go ahead.
I would probably say action, because the heart is important too, and I get that answer and I like it, but it's like saying, oh, I would do this, I would be a good Jew, but only in theory. When it comes to action, then I don't do it. I stand back. Maybe that's my take.
So you're saying that ultimately it has to be an action.
Yeah.
Right. So it could be a nice Jew in the heart, but if it doesn't come out in action, then the whole thing is it's lacking.
Maybe both. So I guess the compromise would be the best.
Yeah, the compromise that's a compromise is the way when you give up.
Okay.
Let's not give up. I want to try to get down to the bottom of this. So action. Gail, what do you say?
Well, I've been on both sides, Rabbi, and I go for action at this point in my life.
Why?
I find the observance of the rituals in connection with the mitzvahs of being kind and watching how you speak and all of those has become very important to me.
Mm-hmm. You're saying at this point in your life, you're going with action. That's
Yeah.
That's the more important part of Judaism. Sharon, go ahead. Let's do one more thought before we get more questions. Go ahead, unmute Sharon. You got to unmute.
But they're both connected. If you do the
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that one is more important and the other one's not important.
but
I'm saying at the end of the day, which one is primary?
I think practicing the action and observing will then lead you to the heart.
Oh, that you do, and then you'll feel it later. Like, right, fake it till you make it, like they say, right? Because even if you're not there, you got to do it. Then when you do it, you'll start feeling it.
And because I know studying with you and taking classes, I always felt very Jewish, but I don't do everything I'm supposed to do. But it's just, how can I word this? It just gives me a ground. You know, I think I've always been kind and helpful and I work from the heart, but I need that balance and I need that strength that when I'm having a tough time, I go back then to the studies that we go through. And I think it just kind of overlaps each other, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So
definitely
I
compliments.
mean, it's hard to say which is, you know.
Right. I once had somebody tell me, and listen, it's I think it's a pretty prevalent attitude that doing mitzvahs doesn't seem very spiritual. A lot of people just, too many mitzvahs, like, do this and do that, and do it this way and that way, a bunch of acts. Putting on tefillin. Putting on tefillin in and of itself doesn't seem like a very significant act. You're taking literally boxes made out of a cow's hide, with straps made out of a cow's hide, and wrapping it all over yourself. I'm saying like, and this is meaningful. This is spiritual. So somebody said, Rabbi, tefillin doesn't talk to me. I'm into spirituality. When I feel spiritual, I get in the right zone and I connect with God. That's Judaism. And you don't be doing all this busy stuff, busy work. This is question number one. What's the place of Judaism? The activities, the behaviors, the rituals of Judaism. What place does that have in the life of a Jewish soul, right? This is the Kabbalah of the soul. We're learning about our soul. So how important? What's the idea? I have another question for you. Why is Judaism so specific? Meaning, Judaism is a way to connect with God. I want to connect with God. So Judaism says, oh, you want to connect with God? I've got a big set of books for you. It's called the Code of Jewish Law. Study it and you'll connect with God. Question is, well, no, 1 second. I need to have all these specific ways how to connect with God. Let everybody figure it out. Some people feel very connected when they go, I don't know what. They go to some mountain and they leave their phone behind and they just look at nature and they look at the landscape. And it fills them up with such a sense of awe That's their spirituality. They go on a hike and that's spiritual for them. Some people, it's volunteering. They go and visit needy people. They help people. They volunteer. Oh, that's my spirituality. That's my religious life. What's wrong with that? Why did Judaism have to come and say, no, you got to do it this way? You want to connect with God? You want to be spiritual? This is the program. Why? Let everybody figure it out. What if Judaism's program doesn't relate to somebody? Somebody says, I don't feel it. I don't like it. It doesn't talk to me. It's not meaningful for me. What's the problem with that? That's question number 2. Why is Judaism so specific, so limited that you got to do it this way? So there's only one path. You know, the word halacha, like Jewish law. What does the word halacha mean? Halacha means a path. This is the path. You got to toe the line. You got to go on the path. Meaning you can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, Judaism is one path. That's question number 2. Why is Judaism so limited and specific in its form? And question number 3 that I want to share with you is, why is Judaism so detail obsessive? Judaism doesn't just have 10 commandments. 10 commandments is easy. 10 things, do it, don't do it. Judaism has 613 commandments. That's a lot of stuff. And each of those commandments have so many laws within it. For example, keeping Shabbos is only 2 mitzvahs. There's only 2 mitzvahs to Shabbos. But it will take years to master the laws of Shabbos. Judaism is so detail obsessive. Judaism has what to tell you for every single thing you could ever do in your life. You're waking up, Judaism tells you how to wake up. You're getting dressed, Judaism tells you how to get dressed. Judaism teaches you how to tie your shoes, how to put on your shoes. Judaism says you should always put on the right shoe and only then the left shoe. This is in Jewish law. Law, not suggestions. Not Kabbalah. Jewish law. Put right shoe, then left shoe. You're going to sleep, Judaism tells you how to prepare for bed. How to sleep. You're getting married, it tells you. You go on vacation, Judaism has what to tell you. It's business, Judaism has what to tell you. Judaism is very obsessive. Why? What's up? What's up with this? Let me live my life. And you want to have a religion? No problem. I'll show up one day a week. I could show up and do some stuff for God and worship. The whole day I'm busy with Judaism. That's really Jewish life. Jewish laws is a non-stop program. It's literally 24/7. There's not a single day of the year where Judaism doesn't have what to do. There's not a single area of human experience where Judaism isn't guiding you. What's up with that? So here we have 3 questions, 3 big questions about Judaism. And hopefully these questions opened us up a little bit, got us thinking a little bit about this idea that there's rituals in Judaism. There's the action part of Judaism. At the end of the day, this is really the bread and butter of Judaism. Judaism has lots of components and ideas and values. At the end of the day, Judaism is at ground floor. The foundation of Judaism is Jewish law, Jewish life, Jewish lifestyle. The instructions that God gave us, right? The 10 commandments aren't 10 values. They're 10 commandments. God is telling you what to do. Mitzvahs, rituals. Do this, don't do that. That's really what Judaism is. And I want to talk about that a little bit. What is that? What's this all about? And this brings us to this week, continuing chapter 4 in Tanya. We are continuing in the handout from last week, chapter 4. We've learned so far about the idea every single Jew has 2 souls. There's an animal soul, there's a godly soul. There's a piece of God in you. And this soul has a lot of personality, it has intellect, it has emotions, and its intellect and emotions naturally gravitate to God. That's its interest. Every soul has interests. What talks to it? So what talks to our godly soul, right? So we discussed this. The godly soul, if you tell the godly soul, let's go buy a new sports car. The godly soul says, you're literally putting me to sleep. This is so boring, I couldn't care less about it. They tell the godly soul that, we could do a mitzvah today. We could connect with God, or we could connect with the divine. Oh, this is literally what excites the divine soul. So the divine soul is a relationship with God. And we discussed this. It has intellect, it has emotion. And then in this chapter 4, last week, we introduced the idea that the soul also has tools of expression. And the key word that we used is garments. That's like an analogy. We get into our clothing and our clothing express us. The soul gets itself, invests itself into a behavior, and that behavior expresses the soul. So the soul has a relationship with God, an intellectual relationship with God, an appreciation, awareness of God. The soul has an emotional relationship with God, and it wants to express that emotion. And the tools of its expression are the mitzvahs. Every mitzvah is a behavior, is an activity, is an expression of the soul, either in thought or in speech or in action. Does that sound familiar? We spoke about this last week. But here's the question. That means all of Judaism, the rituals, the mitzvahs, they are all garments of the soul. Let me ask you a question. What's primary, a person or the clothing on the person? When you see somebody and you say, wow, you look really good today, what makes them look good? It could be the clothing, right? Good clothing could make you look very flattering. But we don't say your clothing look good. What do we say? We say you look good. Which means the whole value of the clothing is only that it's on you, right? You never go to a mannequin and say, wow, that mannequin looks really good. I mean, the whole point of the clothing is that it enhances you. It brings you out. It highlights your beauty. But this is my question to you. Person or clothing? Which one is primary? Which one is secondary? What do you say? Is this an obvious question?
I say the person.
Of course, the person.
You can dress up somebody in beautiful clothes and they could be a miserable person.
Right. So at the end of the day, the person is primary. I mean, can you conceive a situation where somebody's clothing is more valuable than the person himself?
Well, not to me.
Not really, right? Meaning the definition of clothing is that it's an accessory. It's an add-on. It's something which we get into which helps express us. But the point is me, right? Garments, the definition of garments is that it's secondary. So let's apply this to the soul. There's a soul, and the soul has intellect and emotions. It has a world going on within it, a world of a relationship with God. And then we say, oh, the soul could also get into clothing, which are the behaviors. What does that imply? What does that seem to tell us? That seems to tell us that all of the garments, all of the mitzvot are secondary to the soul. That's what it seems to tell us. That ultimately the soul and the emotional world of the soul, that's most important. And the activities are nice. They're like an add-on. They help express the soul. They help dress up the soul. But that's not most important. So this would seem to imply that the Jew in heart is more important than the Jew in action. Because the action is only the garments. This is what it seems to be, which means if you learn the Tanya up until this point, mitzvahs are garments, garments are secondary. So the Alter is going to address this now. And the Alter is going to say, it's true. Garments are secondary. And a garment can only give a person what they already have, right? Which means the person is always more important. Or in other words, there's a limit to how much clothing can bring you out. A clothing can highlight the beauty that you already have, right? But at a certain point, you can't, if you don't possess that beauty, it's not going to work. Like, how does the line go about putting lipstick on a pig? How does that saying go? You know what I'm saying? If it's a pig, it's a pig, There's a limit to how much you can do it, right? So the clothing can only help you bring out what you already have. So the Alter Rebbe says that's generally true, but here's the big catch. Here's going to be the big idea for tonight. The garments, they're garments, but in the case of the soul, listen carefully. There's something greater about the garments than even the soul itself. And in that sense, the soul doesn't only use the garments to express itself, but the garments of the soul, the mitzvahs that the soul engages in, gives the soul something that it itself didn't even have and doesn't have. Let's read. Bottom of page 51, part 2 of the chapter titled The Importance of the Garments, the importance of the mitzvahs. The Alter Rebbe says like this. Let's read. Now, these 3 garments, which are devoted to the Torah and its mitzvahs, although they are referred to as mere garments of the soul, indicating that they are secondary to the soul, nevertheless, right, top of page 52, nevertheless, they possess a feature that makes them of an infinitely greater level and quality than the soul itself. There's something special about the behaviors of the soul, the mitzvahs that the soul does, that is even greater than the soul itself and gives the soul that greatness. What is this? The Alter is saying a mitzvah is vital to the soul. A mitzvah is not just an outlet, a mode of expression. I want to express myself, I'll do a mitzvah. It's much more powerful. What does this mean? What does a mitzvah have that the soul doesn't have? Let's read. This will be understood from the teaching of the Zohar. The Zohar says that the Torah and God are totally one. Torah and God are totally one. Meaning, what does this statement mean? Torah and God are totally one. Meaning that the Torah, which is the wisdom and will of God, right? That's a Torah. You read the Torah, you're reading the wisdom of God and you're reading the will of God, is not merely a glimmer of the divine essence, but is completely united with God himself in all his glory. Because unlike humans, God is, quote, simultaneously the knower, the power to know, and the known, end quote, as explained above, citing the Rambam. What does this mean? When I write a book, I never wrote a book, but if I've written articles. Maybe one day I'll write a book. Okay. Not really on my bucket list for now, but maybe one day. Okay. When I write a book and you read that book, you are reading some of my ideas. How well do you know a person when you read a book that they wrote? How well? What would you say? Not that well. Meaning, many times you can read a book from somebody and you could think you know the person, you meet them, and all of a sudden, totally different person. A book that you write is a glimmer of who you are. It's a glimmer. It's a little piece. It's a little look. It's not you. A book is not you, right? If I give you a book, I'm not giving you me. I'm giving you something that I thought of. Me and my ideas are different. They're separate. God, when God wrote the Torah, he didn't just write a book. He didn't just write a book of his opinions, of his ideas, of his commandments, of his wills, of his desires. God literally wrote himself into the Torah. God invested his DNA, his genetic code, his very identity into the Torah. This is what the Zohar says. And therefore, the Alter is going to have to explain this to us and unpack this to us, but this is the idea. When a Jew learns Torah, they're getting directly in touch with God. When a Jew does a mitzvah, You're not just doing something that God wants you to do. The mitzvah is a way you get directly in touch with God. The soul is divine. You know, somebody could think a divine soul needs a mitzvah. You're divine already. You're holy. You're a piece of God. You need now mitzvahs. You need to make yourself better. You're there already. You're perfect. Tanya is going to teach us. The soul is a piece of God. But you know what? The same way our children are a piece of ourselves, but they emerge from the womb, and what happens? They become a separate entity. Separate, independent, autonomous piece of me. So it's a piece of me, but it's something else. At the same time, it's separated from me. A piece of me, but separated. And therefore, a child could decide to be disobedient and not listen to parents. The child could decide to ignore the parents, never to talk to the parents again. It's a piece of the parents, a piece of the mother and father, but it's disconnected. That's what our souls are. It's a piece of God. God is in our DNA, but we're disconnected from God. We relate to God. It's natural to us, but we are not in direct contact with God. The soul doesn't have that ability to be in direct contact with God. But a mitzvah and Torah, Judaism, is not just the will of God or the wisdom of God, it is God itself, himself. And when we do a mitzvah, it gives our souls the gift of connecting back home, direct contact back home, direct, intimate contact with God. But now the Alter Rebbe has to unpack this for us. That's the idea. A mitzvah is not just the will of God. Studying Torah is not just the wisdom of God. It's the soul's medium of connection with God intimately. Let's unpack this a little bit. Let's appreciate this a little bit better. We're talking a lot about making a relationship with God. You know, today, talking about a relationship with God is somewhat common. Jewish world, non-Jewish world. Everybody believes they could connect with God. You could talk to God. You know, maybe the Christians made it popular, but the whole idea of, talking to God, praying to God, the idea of having a connection, a relationship with God, it's something which is somewhat taken as we take it for granted. Let's really try to understand this concept of relationship with God. Let's think about it. Let's really think about it deeply. Let's think about it logically. Connection with God, relationship with God. How do you make a relationship with God? Let's talk a little bit about relationships. How do you make relationships? How do you make relationships? So first of all, relationships are between two different entities. That's right. You can't really have a relationship with yourself, meaning you could, but that's a different discussion. Your right hand and your left hand don't have a relationship with each other. They're one, right? So in order for there to be a relationship, there has to be two separate entities, two distinct, independent entities. And one entity has to invite the other entity into its life. And that other entity has to be willing to enter this other person's life, right? It's a two-way street. Right? So that's the first thing. So you have to make space for somebody else in your life. Like they say the joke. There's once a young man, he was going out, this is his first time dating. He didn't know how to date. He didn't, This guy was a young guy, he was pretty self-centered. He goes on his first date with a young woman. And this guy just doesn't stop talking. He's talking and talking and talking for 2 hours, doesn't stop talking. And finally he says, enough of me talking. Now it's your turn. So what do you think about me? Yeah. Right. Self-centeredness is not a good recipe for a relationship. Means that you're bringing somebody in, and that somebody else has to be interested in that relationship, or else it's called harassment, right? You try and make a relationship with somebody and they're not interested, that's not called a relationship. So relationships are difficult. Relationships is a complex. And how do you build the relationships? You have to have two entities. These two entities have to be interested in each other, has to make space for each other, has to make a willingness, has to be a willingness to enter this relationship. Which means relationships have to be a conscious thing that we're doing. And to get more specific, how do we build relationships? Relationships are built upon common ground. Common ground. The more common ground we have with each other, the more space we have. Literally, the more square footage we have to build upon. So a marriage, for example, is meant to be 100% common ground. We're fully dedicating our lives to each other, and we're going to build a relationship. It's not just a business relationship, right? A business relationship means that we have a limited common ground. Marriage means, and with humans, we could do that, which means we have emotional needs, and we're going to be there for each other's emotional needs. We have practical needs. We could do things for each other. I can appreciate what you're doing. And in general, we have so many things in common upon which to build common ground on. So for example, we both speak the same language. So we could speak and connect and build a relationship with speech. And intellectually, we could speak about ideas. We could intrigue each other. We could connect. We also appreciate each other. We understand each other. So when I smile, you understand what I'm doing, right? It's another way we build relationships. And we understand the value of a hug. So when I hug somebody, we understand that that's another form of communication. We have that in common. So with humans, we have a lot of common ground to build a relationship upon, which is why we're pretty successful. Okay, let's say you go to China, and you meet a Chinese person, and you become friends with that Chinese person. Is it more difficult to build a relationship with a Chinese person? Yeah, you could still do it, but it's a little bit more difficult. Why? Because you have a language barrier. Language barrier means you have less in common, right? There's less open space right here to build a relationship upon. It becomes a lot more difficult, and that relationship is not going to be able to be as deep. We can't really communicate, and we can't really open up our minds to each other and our hearts to each other. Then that's not going to be it's going to be a more superficial relationship. Okay, animals. Could we build a relationship with animals? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Anybody who owns a dog or a cat will say they have a relationship with that animal. Yeah, that's fine. You could have a relationship with an animal. Is a relationship with an animal as deep as a human-to-human relationship? Gail says sometimes. Really? It could go as deep?
I'll tell. There's a woman in our building, not just her. Her dog, she's in a wheelchair now, and she was trying to hold the leash of the dog and wheel her wheelchair. So I offered to take the dog for her to the front door. She gave it to me, but that little puppy, or it's not a puppy, she's had him a long time, but that dog would not go more than a few steps.
No, okay, that's for sure true. And dogs have a lot of loyalty and have a lot of heart to them. I'm not saying that. Is that relationship as deep as a human relationship?
No.
No, which means like this. The common ground between a human to a dog is very limited. You can't have a DMC with a dog, right? You know what a DMC is? Dr. Lieb, you know what a DMC is? Not the medical, not DNC. DMC, M as in Mary, deep, meaningful conversation, right? Could you sit and have an intellectual conversation with a dog? No, you can't. Not even for 5 minutes, not even for 1 minute. So your relationship, your space to build a relationship becomes a lot more limited. So what do you have to do? So you could cuddle with each other, you could throw a ball and they'll catch the ball. So you could do things, but it becomes a lot more difficult. And therefore the relationship is not going to be as deep as a human relationship. A human relationship is also an emotional relationship, it's an intellectual relationship. It's okay. What about an ant? Could you build a relationship with an ant? Did you ever try? Why are you saying no if you never tried? Okay. Has an ant ever tried making a relationship with you? Why are you saying no? Maybe yeah. Maybe the ant was trying to make, maybe the ant crawling on your counter actually wanted to make a relationship with you. Why can't we make a relationship with an ant? It's very simple. We're out of common ground. We're out of, I'm sorry, we're just, we can't relate to each other. And I know ants have two eyes and I have two eyes. And an ant has a digestive system and I have a digestive system. And an ant has legs and I have legs, but I'm sorry, at this point, we're out of range. We're out of range. We have no form of communication, we have no form of meaningful connections, therefore there's no relationship. Not only is that I'm not interested in a relationship, I can't make a relationship. We're simply out of each other's leagues. This gap is too big to, this divide is too big to gap. Now let's think logically about the idea of creating a relationship between a human and God. What's a human? What's a God? And is there common space here? Is there common ground for us to be able to build a meaningful relationship where we could do things for each other, where there's vulnerability? A finite, mortal human being and the God, the infinite God of the entire universe. If I can't make a relationship even with an ant, I think we're out of luck with God. Logically speaking, the idea that a human being, I can make a relationship with God, it's a foolish thing. What are you even talking about? What are you even talking about? Have you ever thought through this? Making a relationship with God? It's a ridiculous thought. It's a ridiculous thought. I remember I once saw a video on YouTube that zooms out from Earth. Just imagine yourself. You're standing on your street, whatever street you're on, or the street that you live in, and just start zooming out. Zoom out. Zoom out to your whole city, to your whole state, to the whole country, to the United States. Your city and your street disappears. It doesn't exist anymore, right? From that perspective, there's no streets. Your house doesn't exist. And then there's a whole globe. America is a tiny little part of, and then you zoom out even more, and also there's a whole solar system, and Earth is a speck. And then there's the galaxy that we're in. If you zoom out to the observable universe, which means everything that with using the tools of modern day science, the entire expanse of the universe that we know of, not only is Earth invisible, our entire galaxy is invisible. Our entire galaxy is like a speck. So we live, the way we're wired is that we all have healthy egos, very good, which is a very good thing, and therefore we take ourselves very seriously. And all of us think that we're important people, or life itself exudes a sense of self-importance and self-value and self-worth. But if you think about it logically and objectively, why are we of any more significance than a speck of dust on Jupiter? Speck of dust on Jupiter. There's trillions of particles of dust on Jupiter, and there's one. What's one piece of dust on Jupiter? Nothing. And what's one human being in the scale of everything? Nothing. And nothing is going to make a relationship with God, with the infinite God? What does that even mean? God is totally out of reach. You're walking in nature and you say, oh, I'm making a relationship with God. I feel so spiritual. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're being delusional. It's like an ant walking next to you saying, I'm making a relationship with a human. No, you're not. I don't even know you exist. I'm not even looking at you and I don't care about you. Right? So you have to realize that. A human being doesn't really have a way to connect with God. a relationship with God is not really within our deck of cards, logically speaking. Let's read that. Let's continue reading inside. Towards the bottom of page 52. Am I losing you here with this idea, or are we on? This is the idea. This is the premise. Which means when we talk about having a relationship with God, we have to understand what that means. We can't just take it for granted. Oh yeah, of course, relationship with God. Well, what are you even talking about? That's such an outrageous thing to talk about. Relationship with God. Who, what, when, how? Makes no sense. Let's read. Bottom of page 52. Is an infinite God accessible? So the Tanya continues. This concept, however, needs further explanation. Is it really possible for a finite human to connect with an infinite God? After all, God is referred to throughout the Kabbalah as Ein Sof, without end. Throughout all of Kabbalah, how do you describe God? Infinite, no end, no description. And therefore, when something is totally infinite, as King David says in Psalms, his greatness can never be fathomed. Nobody could really understand God. And the Zohar says, no thought can grasp him at all. The human being doesn't have a way to really grasp and understand and relate to God. And similarly, God's will and wisdom are also described as non-graspable. As the verse states, no one can fathom his understanding. We're on the top of page 53. And it is written, can you through searching find God? And it is written, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. So we have all these sources and ideas which really tell us a very simple idea. God is not really within reach. You can make a connection, you can make a relationship, you have a meaningful, you have a meaningful way to connect here. So how then is it possible for a human to connect with God? So this is the first premise. We don't have any tools. The human being, with the tools that the human has at his or her disposal, has no way to connect with God. A connection with God is simply not within our deck of cards, like I told you earlier. Oh, but this is where we can start understanding where Judaism comes in. What's Judaism? Why did God give us mitzvahs? To make our lives hard? Is God our controlling father, controlling boss? Controlling and determining every single step of our lives? Not giving us space? Is that what Judaism is? That's a cynical way to look at it. But what's Judaism? Why did God give us this whole system? So the Alter Rebbe continues, page 53, touching the infinite. To explain this, the sages taught, in the same place that you find the greatness of God, there you find his humility. God is great. God also has the power of humility, to be small. What does that mean? The explanation of this teaching. God did us all a very big favor. God knows he's totally out of reach for the human being. So what did God do? This is what God did. God did an unbelievable feat. God has compacted his infinite will and wisdom into a finite form. What's the finite form? The 613 mitzvot of the Torah and their associated laws. The text of the scripture, Tanakh. And the commentaries found in the Agados and Midrashim of the sages of blessed memory. God himself is infinite. So what did God do? God wanted to give us the gift of connection. So what God did is, God did an unbelievable feat. Now how big of a feat would it be if you could fit an elephant into a needle hole? It'd be a big feat, right? God's feat is infinitely greater than that. At the end of the day, an elephant and a needle hole are both limited, right? They're both finite size. Okay, the elephant's a little bit bigger than a needle hole. But at the end of the day, they have some type of relationship. God fit infinity into finite. God literally bottled himself up into bite-sized pieces. It's like that we have a meaningful, direct way to come into contact and make a relationship with God. God bottled himself up. And the containers, the bottles that hold God are the mitzvahs. Every single mitzvah is really, it's not a mitzvah. We're not just doing what God wants us to do. When we put a mezuzah on our door, when we put on tefillin, when we light Shabbos candles, you're actually coming directly in touch with God. This infinite God that's so much greater than you, in your home, directly. When you learn Torah, directly in touch with God. That's a bottle of God. God is packaged personally up in Torah. When you learn a piece of Talmud and the teachings of the sages, these are not just teaching of rabbis. This is a medium. God packaged himself up within there. Let's continue. Why did God do this? God performed this feat so that every soul in a human body be able to mentally grasp the Torah and practically observe it as best as possible in action, speech, and thought. God made the avenue of a connection to him so easy, so accessible, that every Jew, every soul should be able to connect with God. You know, if God was only found in deep mystical teachings, then it would be a little bit difficult to connect to God. You have to become a big mystic, you have to become a big rabbi, you have to become a big scholar. But God put himself everywhere, in every mitzvah. Even a 5-year-old child can get in touch with God. A 5-year-old child can't join our Tanya classes, but they could do a mitzvah. A 3-year-old girl can light Shabbos candles. That little girl right now just came into direct contact with God and has an intimate personal relationship with God. God is very accessible to every single Jew. In our religion, nobody has a deeper connection to God than another Jew. The greatest scholar and the biggest simpleton, the little kid, has equal access to God. God made himself so available. God bottled himself up in all of Judaism. Every person. Let's continue. And through the fulfillment of Torah and its mitzvahs, your soul can dress all 10 of her powers in these 3 garments, connecting every fiber of your soul with God. Let's now connect the dots. You have a soul. Your soul is godly, but it's not in direct contact with God. Your soul actually is homesick. Your soul, just like a child. Can you imagine a child who wishes to get in touch with his parents? We spoke about this last week, right? The homesickness, right? We talked about it last week. I don't know if it was the morning class or the night class. How meaningful is it to a child who's stuck in overnight camp and he's crying, and he gives the child a phone, says, go, call your mother, call your father. How meaningful is that? Direct contact. The soul doesn't have direct contact with God. It's a child of God. It's godly. But when you do a mitzvah, the garments of the soul give the soul the gift of intimate, direct contact with God. Or to use the words that Tanya is going to teach us soon, to give a hug to God, embrace God. Direct contact. Which is an unbelievable, we have to appreciate this. A relationship with God is an unbelievable gift. God said, I'm giving you a way you could connect with me. Because I want a connection with you. I want a relationship. And I'm going to give you the gift of a relationship. That's really what Judaism is. Okay. I want to show you a little video. And then I want to read a little bit more of Tanya. So we're going to go a few minutes over time, all right? But I want to finish the concept. So here's a little video of a Jew, a man, who lives in Los Angeles, and he shares his experience having a meeting with the Rebbe. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Here we go. A 3-minute video.
So the three of us went to see the Rebbe, myself, my ex-wife, and her father, my father-in-law, and Mr. Ratner, Maurice Ratner. Before, when we were waiting there, they came up to me and said, they told me I should write out a note for the Rebbe, some requests, and I told them I have no requests, and I have nothing I want from the Rebbe. I was just here to facilitate my wife and helping her in, and other than that, I was just a bystander. I'd be sitting in the back, so there was no need for me to write anything. They were very, very insistent that I couldn't go in unless I wrote something. So, with that ultimatum, I just said, if God's so great, why does he insist on all these tiny details? Why can't he let them skip? And that's all. That's the only question I had. And just because he told me I had to write something. And it always did bother me that if God was so great, why was he stuck with all these tiny details? And it seemed to upset him if we missed one. And if you used a meat spoon in cottage cheese, you have to go bury it and pull your hair out and everything. So I could never get that. It really was beyond me. So that's basically what I was asking the Rebbe, is what all the angst was about. So he began by asking each one of us our names, and I told him my name was Avram David. He asked our mother's name too, Ben Malka, and my ex said Yochevet Chana Baspina, and my father-in-law said Moshe Ben Chana. And the Rebbe just stopped and he began tapping with his pencil. We all just looked, and then the Rebbe addressed my father and says, your son-in-law has 2 names and your daughter has 2 names. My father thought, he said, oh, my mother's name is Hannah Hendel. The Rebbe just nodded and wrote that down too. And then he turned to me and he said, I don't understand your question. So I thought it was pretty forthright. So I started to say it in Yiddish, thinking maybe he had difficulty with English. And he stopped me, put his hand up, and he said, it's not for God, it's for us. And I could see, I'm a little impressed, God wants us close to him, and this is the path he gives us. It's like he gave a path, and he said, if you follow this path, you'll find me. And it's not that if you don't follow this path, I'm going to blind you or I'll hurt you. Just the opposite. I want you to come close, and here I'm giving you a path, a means in which you can find this proximity, this closeness with me. It was a very radical thought to me. I had never ever seen Judaism in that light. It was always focused on what was forbidden and the consequences of doing what's forbidden. It was in yeshiva, I was away, everything was taught with the slap and with the hit, and you're no good, and Ozvorf. And so I had more than my fill of Judaism, but this really intrigued me. I was very taken. I felt as though I was in a dark room and someone had opened up a light.
That's the video, but I love this little story. He comes in saying Judaism is a drag, right? God is controlling us. It's so stressful. Never says the mitzvahs aren't for God; they're for us. God wants a connection to us, and God gave us the tools that we can connect with Him. If you want to know what Judaism is, it's not just commandments. It's the stuff of relationship. Mitzvah says we, mortal human being, have the common ground with God, and we build the relationship there. That's really, every mitzvah we do, we are connecting with God. Direct contact with God. Because God wants it, and God gives us the way to directly do it. Let's conclude. Bottom of page 53. With this, we can explain the teaching of the Talmud that compares the Torah to water. It's an interesting thing. Throughout all of the Talmud and scripture, Torah and water are used many times. And the Talmud explains it like this. Just as water naturally flows from a higher level to a lower one, the same is with the Torah. The nature of water is that it will always find lowest ground, right? That's why you have to do good grading by your home. What happens if you don't do good grading? The water is always going to go to the lowest place. If the lowest place is your basement, then your basement will be flooded. So, right? That's the nature of water. Water goes down. Torah, God created Torah with that nature as well. Torah goes down. What does that mean? Now we understand what it means. Let's read. Top of page 54. The Torah descended. God sent Torah on a descent. From its sublime setting as God's infinite will and wisdom, right? Which the Torah and God are one, which no thought can grasp him at all. So God begins as something which is totally out of reach. And from there, the Torah has journeyed downwards through hidden levels. This is Kabbalistic lingo here. Hidden levels of descent that did not diminish or dilute it, step by step, through the downward spiral of spiritual worlds. God made Torah become manifest, lower and lower and lower and lower, until the Torah all of a sudden becomes something that we could relate to. Torah talks about me, Torah talks about you, Torah talks about life, about civil life, about social life. Until it reached its final point. What's the final point for the Torah? What's ground level for the Torah? Ground level for the Torah is where God's will and wisdom is compacted and manifest in physical objects and worldly concepts. Now you read the Torah, it doesn't seem very spiritual, right? What's the Torah talking about? It's talking about life. It's talking about life. It's talking about our physical world. Torah is very physical, right? Physical objects and worldly concepts, which is the subject of virtually all the Torah's mitzvot and their laws. That's where Torah is manifest. Very physical. And into the texts of the Torah, written in physical form, right? The Torah comes in a very physical form, ink on parchment. In the 24 books of the scripture, the Tanakh. So the Torah keeps on going downward and downward until it becomes so physical. Torah all of a sudden becomes a book for our physical, mortal, corrupt human world. Why did God do this to the Torah? You know, our sages teach about the concept that the Torah really exists totally beyond our world. The Torah exists on many different levels. But God made Torah to be so practical, so not spiritual, so physical, so tangible, right? Eat matzah made out of flour and water, and tefillin made out of a cow's hide. And we're going to talk about business and money, and Torah becomes so down to earth. Why? This is why. All this, so that every mind, even not a spiritual mind, even not a scholarly mind, every mind should be able to grasp the Torah and mitzvahs. And that even the peripheral garments of speech and action, even our actions, which are not as deep as our thoughts, even actions, which are more superficial than thought, should be able to grasp them, the Torah and mitzvahs, and dress in them. God wanted to make himself so accessible to us. So God didn't say, go to a mountain and meditate and lose yourself, and that's how you connect with me. That would be very lofty. God said, I'm present. I'm present in your dining room. I'm present in your office. I'm present in your bedroom. I'm present. I'm with you always. I'm accessible to you always. There's so much common ground we have with God. We can always build that relationship with God, and we're always connected with God. That's the gift of Judaism. And without Judaism, the soul doesn't have that connection. It doesn't have that intimate bond with God. Yiddishkeit, Judaism, Torah and mitzvahs gives us direct contact with God. That's the love language we have with God. Thus, the Torah and its mitzvahs provide garments and expression for the entire soul. For all 10 soul powers and for all the soul's 613 subcomponents from head to foot. There's not a single area of the human experience which doesn't have a mitzvah. Clothing, you have mitzvahs. Friendships, you have mitzvahs. You own a home, you have mitzvahs. You own a car, you have mitzvahs. It's daytime, you have mitzvahs. Nighttime, you have mitzvahs. You're not feeling good, you have mitzvahs. Everything is a mitzvah. God gave every area of life, every dimension of the soul, an area to have a relationship. Consequently, and here's the punchline. Consequently, where does all this lead us to? Your soul literally touches the infinite. It literally becomes completely bound in the bundle of life with God. There's not a single area of the soul's life which doesn't have the ability to connect to God. And the light of God literally engulfs your soul, dressing her from head to foot. As the verse states, top of page 55, he is my rock in whom I take refuge. God fully surrounds me. I'm living in this environment fully of within God. And it is written, as with a shield, the will of God surrounds him. Like a good shield, fully covers you. God fully surrounds us as a Jew. Right? The will of God surrounds him, meaning referring to God's will and wisdom that is manifest in his Torah and his mitzvahs. We'll stop here. What is Judaism? Why is Judaism so detailed oriented? Why is Judaism so not spiritual and so physical? Why is Judaism pervasive in every area of our life? That's the blessing. That's the beauty. God made himself so accessible in every area of our life. That's the gift. And that's what Judaism does for the soul. Judaism gives the soul the gift of getting in touch with its core in a deeper way than the soul would ever be able to do on its own. You do a mitzvah, you're connecting back with your source. No more homesickness. You're there, direct contact. I'll tell you something. I'm going to conclude with a story. When I was a little child, my parents run the Chabad in Princeton, New Jersey. I was raised, I was born and bred and continue to live the life of a shliach, that's what it's called, of service as a representative of the Rebbe. So I grew up in Princeton. So I remember that I was a little kid, and my parents had a minyan, and they only had 9 men there. They were looking for a 10th. So my father went outside looking. Maybe one of the guys on the street is Jewish, and yeah, there's a guy. His name is David. I'm not going to say his last name. And David comes into are you Jewish? Yeah, he comes in. My father puts on with him tefillin. It was a weekday. He never put on tefillin before in his life. He was a real hippie. Had black hair, long black hair, real hippie, real hippie from the 90s, early 90s. He puts on tefillin and he started crying. It sounds like a cliche, but started crying. Years later, and that was the beginning of his journey to reconnecting with his soul. And years later, he told me, he says, I cried then. Until today, I have no clue what made me cry. Like, I don't, what are you doing? You're putting on black boxes in your arm and head and you're crying? Well, what are you getting emotional about? You can't explain it. But a mitzvah gives the gift to our souls of connection, of oneness with who we really are. That direct contact with God. And really it's an emotional experience. And it's a gift, we can't take it for granted. And this helps us understand, if we want to understand the structure of our souls and how our souls tick and operate, we have to understand what the mitzvah, what learning Torah does for our soul. Right? When you go to a course, right? I push people to come to Torah classes. You're not just coming to a nice class with interesting ideas which will intrigue you and interest you and inspire you. When you learn Torah, whatever the side benefits are, that's secondary. When you learn Torah, what's really happening is you're getting in touch with God. Directly, intimately. That's why it's so important.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So the answer to your question before is even if you have a good soul, it's the mitzvahs that's more important, because the mitzvahs put you into your soul in touch with God.
Exactly.
So I was wrong when I said that.
The Jew at heart will never ever get close to God. The Jew at heart is very important. But at the end of the day, without the mitzvah, you're out of touch.
That's right.
You do a mitzvah, you're in touch with God. So yeah, that takes us back to the beginning of class.
Okay.
This is why Judaism puts so much emphasis on do a mitzvah. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to feel it. Just do a mitzvah. Why? That's where it's really at. Of course.
No,
Leah, how are you?
Baruch Hashem.
And
You know, recently I came to learn something that was interesting. You know, when they would do a korbanot, and it would be like a sweet odor or sweet smell to God. And I thought, wow, you know, God really likes the smell of burning
Barbecue.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
And then I realized and I learned that's not what it is at all. That sweet smell is that you are making that connection, that you are doing something that pleases God.
Right.
So to me, it was this big aha. It just never, I never.
I'll give you a little example, Leah. It's like with babies, with our little children. And we connect with our little children. What do? You know, my 2-year-old child is playing in the playroom. They get down on the floor, right? If I'd ask you, do you want to go play with blocks for an hour? You'd be like, whoa, right? What do you think I am? I'm an idiot? Well, like, you know, it'd be degrading, right? Yeah. But all of a sudden you have a child or a grandchild, get down on the floor, you play, and you enjoy it. You enjoy it. You have such nachas, you enjoy it. It's an amazing thing that when there's enough love, we could squeeze our essence into baby play, and we could enjoy it. And God does that with us.
Listens.
God gets down on our level and says, I want to spend time with you. And you're right. God, from God's perspective, this is not something that God cares for, is interested in. But when there's enough love, we're capable of doing that. We could spend time and we have that connection and I'm proud and we're doing something together and I can enjoy it. That's the experience of us doing things with God. We celebrate Shabbos with God. God needs my candles. It's an act of love. Mitzvahs are God's love to us, to give us a platform that we could build a relationship with Him. And then it becomes meaningful to God. That's what it is.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Seid gesund, dear friends.